Without further ado, let me quickly introduce our next segment, Changemakers, building a learning organizational culture to drive the decade of the 20s. And this, to set the context for this, Confucius once said, "He who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in great danger." In this next session, leaders will discuss on how aligning people, learning, culture, and leadership will be a key force in driving exponential business growth. To set the context and introduce the panel, I would like to invite on stage Rekha M. Menon, Chairman and Senior Managing Director, Accenture in India. She's an outdoors person. She loves nature and street food, so please put your hands together for Rekha.
There are no slides. So let's start with there are no slides. There's going to be a good discussion. Morning, we're shifting gears and taking the fourth pillar, which is the learning as part of the session, and speaking on how do we build a learning culture to take us to the next decade. And joining me on the panel are Mark Eddy, who's CEO of Crum & Foster. Mark, if you could come up. And when I asked him one personal thing that, about him, he said, "I have twin teenage daughters, so I have no time for anything else." Dr. Anish Shah, CEO designate of Mahindra Group, who is a traveler, a trekker, and loves sport. And therefore, I asked him if he was there yesterday, and he missed the Kapil Dev interview last evening. So that's his loss. And then finally, but not in any order, is Dr. Pramath Sinha, who is the founder of ISB and Ashoka University. And he himself is a trekker and treks every 2 years, and last one was Everest Base Camp. So these are all very accomplished people besides in their day job. I wanted us really to focus on, so I'm not going to give a speech here. It's for them to talk, and I want this to be a really lively discussion and then open it up for Q&A. I really wanted to focus on the why. Why is it a business imperative to focus on learning at all? Is there a need? I mean, if I just look at it from our industry, the technology changes are coming fast and furious, and they're changing both what businesses do, but also how they do it. At the same time, they're opening up new opportunities, both in adjacent areas and new industries, new markets, and new business models, focusing on different employee experiences, focusing on consumer, and therefore, there's a huge potential for organizations to shift. And to do that, learning becomes critical. And we've seen a lot of data being thrown around. We just heard that World Economic Forum has predicted 133 new skills, new job roles. Just that, because of technology disruption, focuses on the business imperative for skilling if you're not going to get left behind. So with that as context, and the fact that there really is a new urgency, especially in markets like India, for adult learning, if we are not going to leave behind people and gather the socioeconomic consequences of learning and use that. With that as context, I want to start the conversation with my team. All right, so I wanted to start off by asking, is, in your industry, in each of your industries, is learning an imperative at all? Is it a business imperative? And let's start with you.
So let me start first with the challenge that our industries face. If you look at the various areas that we are in, from automotive to farm, IT services, financial services, almost all our industries are being disrupted by technology in a very significant way. Buying cars today is about technology and connected cars. Even tractors, which one would think are sort of mechanical instruments, are really now being sold with precision farming. And looking at how AI can play a role in helping a farmer decide what is the amount of fertilizer or the amount of seed to put in a particular square inch of plot based on various different data that's fed into a particular engine. IT services, you're all well aware of, so I don't really need to talk much more about that. that's probably the one that's evolving the fastest in terms of technology disruption. And financial services, from a fintech standpoint, is really coming in and disrupting our businesses. So the imperative first is at the business level, in terms of the level of change that's happening. And as a result, how do we have leaders that understand that change, and how do we have all our people that understand it as well? So that's really the starting point of why we need this.
Rekha, I'm now, I guess, in the education industry, but what's happening there from a demand perspective may not be as relevant as my own experience with education over the last 20 years or so. If I look at where ISB graduates are going every year, when we first started, people used to go to Hindustan Lever and ITC. Today they go to Amazon and Flipkart and Google. If I look at the Ashoka University graduates, they get trained in history and political science, and then they go and work at Uber Eats. There isn't a degree or a major that can educate somebody to go and work at Uber Eats. What major do you study to go? And so this whole correlation between what education is, and students and parents still today ask the question, what should I major in? As if that's going to dictate what they're going to do in their life, and they don't realize that there's absolutely no correlation any longer. And that gets to the heart of the question you're asking, that even at an individual level, we are all going to have so many careers in our lives that you have to constantly keep learning. So whether the organization provides you a culture or not, as individuals, you have to worry about the fact that you have to constantly reinvent yourself every few years. I think that's happened to all of us. Right. And the pace of that is just going up. Now, if you go back to the organization side, if you want to retain people and if you want to meet their needs, which is this constant need to learn and grow and shift and keep up with technology or disruptions or precision farming in a tractor industry, you have no choice but to cater to the needs of the people in your organization. Otherwise, and Mark and I were talking about this even in a place like insurance, you're going to constantly lose people because they will see themselves getting disrupted. So if I look at it from an education lens, that's the challenge, and that's also the opportunity that I see.
And therefore, since you mentioned insurance, Mark, I'd like to come to your industry. And
so in insurance, right, nobody really comes out of school saying they want to be in insurance, right? So one of our challenges, we need to bring people in, and maybe they are the history major, and they're like, hey, this insurance thing looks pretty good. We need to really train them up almost from scratch. And so that's one challenging aspect. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a lot of people who are in the business who are going to be coming offline and retiring over the next few years, and so that's a big chunk of the business. And then really, we do outsource here, so we've got about 10% of our workforce here with a company called Fulcrum. And so for us, we're trying to get people into the business, get them trained up, and then one of the things we really realized that to get people interested is you need to have a career path, right? And so part of that career path really is learning and development, and there are a bunch of aspects to that, right? There is the technical aspect, but I think there's also the leadership skills that I think Harappa brings to the table. And then for us, one of the bigger challenges is how to organize so that people can get the experience they need to really move up in the organization. And so learning is kind of a broad topic with kind of different levels, and we really think the experience part is probably the hardest one to crack, but you need the other two as well.
Okay, and Dr. Sinha, you mentioned that people say, what should I graduate in? How do you see the expectations of students themselves change, but also the pull side? I mean, if I just take our industry, the technology industry, there's massive skill shortage. We do have millions of engineers graduating each year, but are they ready for the kind of jobs we have? Also, the life cycle of what they learned has shortened dramatically.
Yeah.
And what they learned for 4 years is no longer relevant a year later, and therefore we need to build that agility in. And then there are new areas. I was just reading a report about cybersecurity and how there will be 2 million jobs available just in India over the next 3 years, and who's training for that? So from a demand and supply side, what is the shifts that you're seeing?
So it's difficult to characterize a shift and put it in simple terms because it's oversimplistic, I think. But if I may say, I think you see almost a paradoxical situation where you do need experts. So you need somebody who understands cybersecurity deeply, and we saw this morning the whole theme of the speeches were about that. At the same time, you need somebody who is who's going to be able to shift quickly from cybersecurity to the next thing when it happens. And I think what has happened is and this is there's a strong belief I have, is that while on one hand you want to constantly upskill people in technical skills and functional skills and technology shifts, you also need to go back to what I call foundational skills. Mark referred to it, I paid him to plug Harappa, but he referred to it as leadership skills. And the whole thing is that you have to constantly, on one hand, deepen your skills, and on the other hand, broaden your skills and be able to shift. And if I can say that, 10 years ago when we started talking about, for example, liberal arts education in this country, companies, organizations, parents, students would all be like, how will I get a job after studying this stuff, right? And is this airy-fairy? And in the United States, people are questioning liberal arts education and saying, we've neglected STEM and technical education. And it illustrates this seeming paradox because it's not a trade-off. You need both. And so here, suddenly now, 10 years later, people are flocking to hire our graduates, or parents and companies like yours are saying, oh, Steve Jobs said you need technical and liberal arts, so we should do both. So I see a big shift in the demand where you don't need to convince people any longer. We are still at the early stages, so people call them soft skills, and I think they are anything but soft.
I agree with you.
I think these are the hardest skills to learn, but at the same time, these are skills that are instinctive. I think we as a human race have these skills, but we've killed it in our education system through our schools, and this is particularly more true in India, I think, where through the school system and through the college system, we killed people's ability to think and question and diversify and be open to new ideas and communicate well and so on. So I think it's coming back. There's a revival, if you will. And I think organizations are much more open and very willing to invest behind those areas, which earlier was not the case.
So Dr. Shah, back to you. Your role spans multiple industries and at different stages of evolution. So I'd like your commentary on how do you see learning, therefore, as critical or non-critical, and where does it lie in your organization?
So learning, I would say, is among the most critical areas we have today, just given the challenges. Let me just go back 5 years. At that point, all our leaders were looking at digital as an area where they knew that they had to do something. But their question was, what does digital really mean for me? And at that point, we had to bring in a number of leaders from the outside who could go into each industry and explain what digital meant for that industry, what it could do that improved the customer experience, what it could do that improved productivity from a product lifecycle standpoint and a customer lifecycle standpoint. How do you really make that real for the company? That was the first sort of learning that I would say was introduced from a digital standpoint. Our leaders then took that and said, we must make this work because we see threats coming in from the outside. The challenge then was, how do you drive change in the organization? Because the next level below, was concerned that their jobs would change dramatically. The fiefdoms or silos that they had built up, or the groups that they had built up, the control that they had would start disappearing. And therefore, it's about how do you drive that change? That's where the soft skills become very important in a learning organization. Then it's about highlighting wins. How do you make certain things happen, highlight them, and then get the rest of the organization to follow? How do you bring in the skill sets that are required? Those are all the questions that we had to grapple with. And it had to be done sort of one company at a time. Each company had its own set of challenges and responded a different way.
So actually, you moved into the next one because we've talked about the why. I mean, why is it a business imperative? And it's fairly clear it is. And now it's more the what. I mean, what needs to change? So one, you're saying leadership itself, the way leadership is approached needs to change. Anything else that any of you would want to touch upon within the organization that needs to shift to make it a better learning organization?
I think
I would say one of the big ones is the change, right? The more people are used to changing, right? Introducing change before you need it, getting people change ready is one of those, call them soft skills, that almost goes against human nature, but it's an interesting one as to how to do that without actually making the changes and letting people realize that we're not out to get rid of their job, right? So the moving jobs offshore, robot processing automation, things like that that come online aren't really meant to get rid of people, but they're changes that we need to address, and then the people need to kind of keep progressing. And so I think part of the challenge is getting people ready for the change, and that's we really are fighting human nature on that one.
I think just adding to Mark's point on the impact on people, the organization needs to have a very different and empathetic approach. And we realized that a couple of years ago when we had a pilot that we were doing for using AI for digital marketing. And this pilot was essentially using an AI tool that made all the decisions on digital marketing, on what money to put on a Facebook ad or a Google ad, and it would do it real time. Now, the implication of that was that the team that was doing it, analyzing data and making those decisions, really wasn't required anymore. And that team was the one that was doing the pilot. So how do you tell a team, this is something that's useful, this is important, but as this takes off, your job's not required tomorrow? And how, as an organization, do we give them the comfort that as you learn new skills, there are better roles available for you, and therefore let's put these things in place and have you get better roles in future as well. That's a very tough balance to maintain.
And therefore, as you do that, do you believe that from an organizational perspective, any of you can answer that, the culture itself has to change? How do you build from the top? I mean, Satya Nadella has famously said that the C in the CEO is really the curator of culture of an organization. So how do you shift that culture, or do you need to shift it at all? And where do you start? Anyone?
I would say it's a lot about messaging, right? So we, over the last 5 years, really did a lot of work to change the culture to where, I would say it was a little rough, and then we've introduced these different elements. But think about, so change is one that's interesting. The other one is like giving people some latitude to fail, right? Like I think that's another thing that gets beaten out of people in the formal education process is, failure. If my daughters get an F, it shows up and we have a discussion, it's a whole thing. It's really beaten out of people. And so in business, right, you're going to have some element of things not working out perfectly and getting people to realize that's okay and that's not necessarily a one-way ticket out of the organization. A lot of that, it's celebrating those stories as well as the successes. And so it's a big communication lift, but I do think it comes from, it has come from kind of all levels of senior management.
If you get into this whole area of culture change, this is an endless, there's tomes of research and work that constantly keeps happening. I would only say three things. I would say, number one, that to Anisha's point, you almost want to use digital to drive culture change, which you didn't have access to before. And some of that has been the cornerstone of what I'm trying to do in education. Being a bricks and mortar guy, I do see the limitations of that in the context of trying to quickly change skills and do it at scale. I don't think you have a choice but to, and change culture at the same time. So how do you leverage digital technologies, not just for your business and for your productivity and your life cycles, but for your own learning life cycles, if you will, internally in the company? I think that's a big opportunity. I also think there's a lot of interesting insights now in behavior economics, in cognitive science, in pedagogical theory that has to be brought into the organization if you want to create a learning culture. I mean, we have multiple Nobel Prizes in behavior economics, and they all have implications. So just the whole idea of nudges. How do you nudge people to behave in a certain way? And can you do that very scientifically rather than just intuitively is a big area that I think one can. And I think the third is that somewhere learning has always been by forcing people. And how do you make learning be about letting people learn rather than, having them eat the pill, if you will? And I think a lot of organizations are thinking about that. Interestingly, the government of India is talking about a situation where they're saying, we'll curate all these courses and make it available. And you pay for the course. You take whatever course you want. And I think Future Skills has a little bit of this built into it. You take whatever course you want, and if you complete it, then we'll reimburse you for it. So it's almost like putting the power back. Imagine you being told that you could go to any university in the country, as long as you successfully get a completion grade, somebody else will pay for it. I mean, that's a surfeit of riches. So I think those are the kinds of things that I think are new ways of learning, which I see from an educator's lens, that can actually play a role in also changing culture.
I might even go back to school if that's the setup.
I know, and if I can add our experience at Accenture, what we've done is exactly that, use digital. So we changed our entire learning curriculum and created learning boards, and also recognizing that the average age of our team is much younger, not the gray hairs like us who are used to being in classrooms. So modular learning, on the time, on the go, anywhere, all curated, and we've borrowed heavily from open sources and put them all in and created learning paths for people. And as a result, if I just look at our numbers, our classroom learning has gone down by 70%. We've also saved some money along the way, but our training hours have gone up because it's now up to the individual that we've done. And from a culture perspective, it's being driven by leadership. So we're all publishing our own learning paths to say, here's what I'm doing to encourage that learning.
I guess the question I have on that is, so at scale, the digital learning works quite well, right? But on that higher level, when you start to get to who gets the experience kind of opportunities, we look at some of the digital or the technical or the leadership, right? Success at those signals that you're ready to take that next move. But some of those are really super individualized, right? So for us, doing it as a kind of a blanket is good to a point, but the people that are really going to move up and run with that, it tends to be a lot more individualized.
Oh, I'm not saying that if you've done 5 courses, you're going to move up. Never that. But it encourages the learning, and then there are the other skills that are needed. And how do you build for that excellence? Sorry, you were going to say something.
So I'd say 2 points. One is that digital allows for customized learning, which is very different from the standard classroom approach, which is here's what you learn and you go back. Now, each person wants something different. And at each level as well, we see that there's a need for a differentiated type of learning. So combination of a high percent of digital with some element of very customized focused training for different leaders becomes important. But the other point I'll mention, what Mark just said right now, people, once they go through these learning courses, want to do something different. Right? They are not content with doing the same thing that they were doing earlier. And we saw that in Tech Mahindra. Tech Mahindra took the lead in training tens of thousands of people from a digital standpoint very successfully, a very strong customized platform that they could go in. And very soon what Tech Mahindra found was that folks who've gone through this a few months later were starting to get uncomfortable in their jobs and say, I want to do something more. And if I don't get an opportunity here, I'm going to go outside and look at that. Because I have learned a lot more now. I can do a lot more. And then the onus was to then build a platform within the company to be able to post various jobs that were available, a very innovative gamified system where people got points for that they could use and say, I want to put certain points on this job, and if I put enough points, I will be interviewed for the job. And that had to be created to be able to give people the ability to go off and do more things once they had the training for that.
That's a
an
great
interesting
point.
dimension, yeah, because you're saying, what both of you are saying really is, once you create these digital platforms and open up learning, people's expectations change. And are you as an organization going to be able to meet those expectations, or is there collateral damage that's going to happen and you'll have you have a risk of people leaving you because you're not meeting the expectations enough? Right?
That's a great point. We've had that a lot, where somebody will hit a certain kind of certificate level, and they're ready to make that next move, and we're like, well, we hadn't planned for that, and so then the clock starts ticking, and you actually go backwards, right? And so I think that's a great point, and one of the things we've tried to wrestle with on that is to have almost in-house guidance counselor, right? So that when somebody hits that level, they raise their hand, and then we kind of spring into action, as it were, to make sure that we manage that expectation. But that's a great point.
Okay. But we are still talking about learning for the now. I want to shift a little bit and talk about, how do you see, because as we move forward in the next decade, we're still talking about our workforce. That's not going to happen. We're going to be working in the gig economy. We're not going to have all our people employed by us 100%, and you already have that in insurance sector. So there's the gig economy, there's the multi-generational workforce, there's the cross-geography workforce. There are very many different skill sets. There are people who are formally trained, and then people that you will use that are not formally trained. So I'd like the educationists in the room first to address that and see how do you address that and how do you approach it? What's different things that we'll need to do?
And so your question is about how do you prepare people for the future rather than for the present?
Yeah. One, how do you prepare people for the future? But my other question is, our conversation so far has focused really on our current organizational constructs, which is,
Yes.
These are my people, and here's how I train them or don't train them. I want to shift that to, it's already shifting. There's, with the boundaryless organizations, you have people who are in the gig economy who are not going to be your employees, but you still need to train them. You have people who are going to pull in from the informal sector. You have different generations of people that you need to train. So very many different angles. Take whichever angle you want, and how do we approach it?
That's a tough question. I didn't come here prepared to answer tough questions. I guess I think what you are yourself saying is that the way you induct, train, and indeed your value proposition to people is completely changing. And I think that is where this whole topic becomes important, because now it's no longer just your salary or your job description or your contractual relationship or a gig relationship with a company. But I think people are looking for genuine personal growth experience as a result of working in a company. In fact, people are figuring out how can I, by joining this company or this job or doing this little contract, switch. It's almost like earlier, if you wanted to be an engineer and become a product manager, you had to go get an MBA. Today, they could come and work for Mark or for Anish. And I think that's how people are seeing jobs as well. And I see formal degrees going away completely and becoming fungible with the experience of working in a place. And so I think from my education lens, and I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, I see this whole education is here and work is there divide completely getting disrupted. And so you could argue that the university or the college is coming into the workplace and vice versa.
Right. So like we're saying internally that the formula is gone. It's learn, work, repeat.
Yes.
Learn, work, repeat.
Yeah, well,
You know.
you've said it better than me, right?
So, but therefore, what happens to the education sector? If I can move out of the current topic just for a minute, because you're saying degrees go away.
It's very interesting. I think India is going to lead the way in some of this because of our constraints. You know, we have 25 million kids being born every year. 25. You have to just think about that. 25 million kids going through grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, this is massive. Never in the history of the human race have we had to educate so many people so quickly. Just think about that. So we are just not going to be able to do it in the current models. Old models, new problem. Doesn't work. So I think in India, you are going to see a complete disruption because schools are failing us, colleges are failing us. And trying to change the school and college system is not the answer. A new model is the answer. So what you just said is going to be the only way you are going to educate 25 million people every year through their life. And so this seamlessness of learn, work, repeat, or university work all becoming seamless is the only way you're going to solve this problem.
So how would a Mahindra Group, how would your organization therefore have to relook at its current models and open itself up, given what's just being said of going forward and how the workforce will change? So how do you see it? I mean, any indicators yet?
Rick, one thing, just stepping back from that question for a minute, we see customer expectations changing.
Right.
Customers now want things immediately because they're used to getting that somewhere else. Someone else is doing a great job in giving them a cup of coffee or whatever else that they want. And they expect that level of service and that level of customization and attention in everything that they get. What that results in is, as you mentioned, not just in education, but in organizations as well, we see lines blurring across functions.
Right.
Right? So it's no longer I'm the sales head, I'm going to take leads that come in and work with my organization to drive sales of cars or whatever else I do. I have to understand what AR technology is and see if I can find a way to get AR technology to showcase a sales platform better. I need to understand other technologies from a lead generation standpoint and see how I can get the best customers or the most likely customers to buy coming in and prioritize them. There's a whole host of things that's happening that each leader needs to understand that's beyond their core functional area. So the question then is, how do you train for that? Right? A lot of that has to happen on the job. A lot of it is modular, that you need this training at this point in time. You need to understand this technology, or you need to understand a certain function to be able to serve your customer better. And that modularization, again, leads to digital technologies being able to provide that learning. But that has to result in a change in mindset of how things happen. And that has to change at the school and university level. You can't go through university with a very set mindset and then come into the work life and suddenly find that I need to keep learning on the job. I need to find ways of adding to my skill set every day in a different manner. That has to happen much earlier.
So what you're saying is, I mean, which is what we are experiencing too, and especially in the technology area, which is moving faster. A, organizational agility. Two, multidisciplinary teams or multidisciplinary capability. Three, soft skills, as you talked about it, and therefore that has to start at the education level itself, rather than once you come in and it's the organization that is responsible for doing all of that.
That's right.
Right. Mark, you wanted to add something, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I think some of the leadership skills or behavioral skills or soft skills are some of those future skills, right? It's the change mindset or the open mindset. It's the, the idea that you will be learning continuously, and all of those are really those future skills, which you'd like to have people at the very least show up out of university with those skills, right? That shouldn't be that big of a lift. They generally don't, and so that's where I think training in those now is important. The one thing I would add to your earlier question, to the extent we have 10% of our workforce here, we're trying to include them in that career path concept, right? We've got people who've been with us for a decade, and so it strikes me that now is the time to really include our BPO employees in that process and try to get them thinking about career path in the next level as well, which is super tricky, but then that's where I think the digital platforms really come into to play.
Okay, and I wanted to shift, sorry, you wanted to say.
Can I just give two quick analogies? People tell me that my analogies don't always work, but I keep trying. When books came around, the printed book, the only way you could learn was to do the Guru Shishya Parampara, or sit in a classroom with a teacher. And people said, well, so what if they're books? How do you know people are going to read books? How can you learn a new topic by just reading a book? You'll obviously have to go to a teacher and see what happened, right? Today we feel so empowered that you need a new topic, go pick up a book. Self-help books sell like hotcakes even today, right? I think that's what's happening, is that in the new world, you're almost getting the equivalent of the book in the digital space. And the one last analogy I like to use is Google Maps, right? So previously, if you had to go somewhere, you'd invest a lot of time figuring out how you'd go, and you'd ask people. Now it's much more, we are just completely dependent. You don't even think about where you have to go. You get in the car, and you put something in, and you just follow it. I think we are getting into sort of the Google Maps of education and careers in some ways. And almost every day, every trip, you are using it saying, oh, I need to get there, what do I need to do? And it sort of walks you through. And today, it's not even the chauffeurs and the drivers are starting to use it. Mm-hmm. Because when you get into the car, you're on the phone, and you expect that they will have a phone in which they will input the data, and you won't have to keep telling them turn right, turn left, right? So I do think that there's something like that that's happening in this space, and I don't know if that analogy works for you, but it certainly works for me.
Right, which is more, okay.
Yeah.
And therefore, that brings me to the next question, really. The disruptions that are happening, is there space for, therefore, ecosystem collaborations? What's the role of the government in it, in changing learning? What's the role of startups, if you see any? Because we are using, for example, a lot of startups to disrupt our own learning. And any commentary on ecosystems in any angle that you see? One, both the use of it in your organizations, two, disruption that it's bringing in, or a commentary on the role that you want them to play.
The good part there, Rekha, is I see a lot of that change happening by people wanting to do things differently. Mm-hmm. There is so much information access. And I see that even in school children today or college-going kids, that they are going out and seeking other things that their school or college cannot provide. Similarly in organizations. The challenge for us, therefore, is to ensure that we can meet their expectations. We can give them the career paths they want, create the roles they want, and we are nimble enough to do that. Right? If we sit back in what we've been in the past with the hierarchies that we have, that doesn't work. Right? Because we are seeing them coming asking difficult questions of us to say, well, I can do this, I can add value here, why am I not allowed to do that? So I think it's more a reflection on our current hierarchies and how that needs to change.
Okay, hierarchies need to change.
I think I've said enough. I do think that things are actually changing really fast now. I think we are getting to an inflection point. A few years ago, people were unconvinced, and we were still very much on the expertise bandwagon only. And not that expertise has gone out, but I think the importance of going back to foundational stuff. I think Anish said it very nicely in our pre-meeting that, he was a GE black belt and, now perhaps doesn't think so much of that, right? And I think it's not like the GE black belt model was bad, but I think
Put you in a
it's
box.
more than that now. And I think that change is happening.
Okay. I have the last 3 minutes left. I'd like to open this up for questions. If you could keep your questions concise, because I have 3 minutes. While they're talking about it, I do believe that we'll have to work very hard with the government to scale the skilling agenda. And if any of you haven't seen it yet, here's a plug for the Future Skills platform, nasscom's Future Skills platform, which is a great collaborative model between government, nasscom, industry, and academia that's out there.
Hi, my name is Saurav. I'm from ANZ. Now, one of the things which I think you have touched on, that hierarchy need to change. Yes, all sounds good, but still our recruitment process for leadership says that you need these many years of experience. Now, we know the world is changing. How can you expect somebody is coming with these many years of experience can change the world, unless we think about creating new roles, new designations, because the designations what we are doing today, I didn't study in my colleges. Now, I don't expect my son to even know what designation he's going to work for. I think that's something I want to understand, how as a leader you guys are thinking to change that or bring that disruption.
Anish.
So I can address that. What we did at Mahindra in creating a group strategy office 5 years ago, we did exactly that. We said we are not going to look for years of experience or what you have from a traditional standpoint. We recognize the fact that there are hierarchies in many of our companies. It's difficult for them to take people in directly. So we use the group strategy office as a means to say, get in the best talent who are experts in what they do, experts not from a years of experience standpoint, but experts from a mindset standpoint, what they have done, how they're willing to learn. And then they work with our businesses, and at any point in time, they're free to go and join a business. We've had people go in 3 months and 6 months as they work with the business sees what they can do, and they say, I can't let you go. Now, I know for a fact that that person, if that applied to that business, would not have got a job at that level, because the business would have said, I need to get years of experience, you're in this batch, you need to be compared with so-and-so in that other batch. But the minute they're working with them and the business sees what they can offer, they say, I can't let you go, right? So we've had this constant pipeline. Each of my leaders in the group strategy office, in fact, have a KRA that says that every year, 35% of your team needs to be placed in one of the businesses, right? And initially they said, how do we do that? And we said, look, people expect to be moved to a business in less than 3 years, right? So if 35% of the team does not move, you're going to have people here a lot longer. That's not the model we want. So that was one way to break that mold, right? Our data science head is 32 years old. So we've had people like that come in without looking at experience. But you do need to have a different model, right? I wouldn't expect one of our businesses to go in and say that I will do that across the board, because it's difficult for them to justify it.
Okay, I have time for one question.
Good morning. My question is technically for all those large organizations. On the pretext of scale, we force the staff to do the same thing, and it's now proven that the millennials do not want to do the same activity for more than 4 hours. So how do you not leave scale and still provide a job role that is multi-dimensional?
Anybody want to answer that?
Rekha, you should answer that with 200,000 employees.
All right. So the way, in our case, what we are doing really is, we are using technology really as an additive rather than a deduction. It is really adding and taking away some of the transactional work that people don't want to do anymore, and really creating a human plus machine kind of roles where people can find more meaning in them, more purpose into their roles. Also, give them a lot more availability of different types of training, so you can raise your hand once you finish your training to move to another role, and make it all transparent so that people are charting their own careers. And that makes it far more interesting and interactive, where you are charting your own career path than have someone tell you this is what you're going to do for the next 10 years of your life. Okay, it says time up. I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
I can't take any more questions. This was an interesting discussion on how we need to disrupt, why there is a business imperative for learning, how we need to disrupt organizations, how we need to disrupt learning itself, and how all of us are going to have to be constant learners for the rest of our lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we have a huge round of applause for the panel?